started out as discographies, and it was 25 pages long, and now it's somewhere around 270 pages, just that section. The main part of the book about Harmonica Frank and Robert Johnson, the band, Randy Newman, Elvis Presley, Sly Stone, that's never changed. There's never been any, except for one minor addition in the second edition. That's always been left alone. But the back sections are where the book is really alive for me. Whenever I finish a new edition, I start a file for the next one, betting that maybe I'll get to do a next one. And I've even started a file after this came out, although I think the chances of another edition when I'm 90 are kind of slim. But this book, the publishing of this book was just extraordinary. I got a copy of this book off the press August 12th, and the last change I made in the book was July 25th. I don't really understand how they do that. I decided with this book I was going to list the birth and death dates of every person who played any kind of role in the book, either in the main body of the book or in the notes and discographies. I was going to list their name, their birth and death dates to honor them, to mark that. And the last two things that went into the book were the birth and death dates of Robert Johnson's stepsister, who died in late July at 99, and Sly Stone, who died, and Brian Wilson, who died just weeks before that. So that's being able to keep diving back into these stories, into records and recordings that are, maybe discovered, coming out for the first time, books people write, movies people write, poems, songs people write about people who wrote the songs that so moved them, and movies. So I want to read just a short passage about Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. Elvis is the longest chapter in the book. It's 20,000 words, and the notes to his chapter are endless. There are so many remarkable things I was able to find and put into this book, including a video interview between Ike Turner and Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records. Ike Turner and Sam Phillips talking about how they first worked together in around 1952, 1953, and there's tension between them. They go back so far. They have lived so many lives that are intertwined, and they're arguing about white people singing black music, and neither is giving an inch. And finally it's over, and Ike Turner comes over, he hugs Sam Phillips, he kisses him on the cheek, and he seems to be waiting for Sam Phillips to kiss him back, and Sam Phillips clearly, in this extraordinary video, which you can see online, doesn't know what to do. And he doesn't know what to do with his hands, and he looks bereft and lost. He's just sitting in a chair, and Ike Turner is staring down at him, and he starts singing, Sam Phillips starts singing Elvis Presley's first record. That's all right, Mama, that's all right with you, anything you do. And Ike Turner's eyes are just bugging out. And he said, I've known this man forever and I've never heard him sing. Sam Phillips just pushes harder. It's so bizarre. Well, I want to read something from the new notes about Baz Luhrmann's Elvis movie. his White Noise is a credible adaptation and a notably faithful one. The critic A.O. Scott wrote about the writer-director Noah Baumbach's 2022 film of Don DeLillo's 1985 novel. Very little has been added. Well, that doesn't sound like much fun, does it? That isn't the approach that Baz Luhrmann has taken in any picture he's made, making or to an army of complainers, desecrating classics, whether plays or novels, or in the case of Elvis Presley, a fact and an idea. And so Elvis opens, and for the first hour and a half sustains itself as a waterfall of vision and daring. Luhrmann understands that to tell a story already fixed in a common imagination with its own stations of the cross, marked well before you ever set foot on its terrain, you have to do damage to the legend or replace it with better legends, those that speak and appeal to you, as if anyone has the right to tell a story so diffused in culture in their own way, to strip away the sense of inevitability and natural progression that gathers around any such story, to show the desire, the ambition, unlikeliness, and most of all, difference inside that story. And so the most unforgettable sequences in Baz Luhrmann's film, those that actually make the Elvis story bigger than it already was and deeper, mapping roads not taken and playing out unfulfilled fantasies that are nevertheless rooted in reality. The best parts of this movie are all completely invented. As in his 2013 film The Great Gatsby, where Luhrmann placed Nick not at the outside of the story as its narrator, but at the center, with Elvis he makes Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks with a crinkling European accent, the frame of the story. There are really only two characters in the movie: Hanks, born in 1956 as Parker, and the then all but unknown Austin Butler, born in 1991 as Elvis. And just as when his Elvis is on stage, you can forget that it isn't the person himself you're watching. As Hank leans into the great snowman, the Mephistopheles of dancing chickens and bearded ladies, whose evil blossoms inexorably. As the film goes on, you can see the glee the role is giving him. You can see it in his smile. As a character, he believes, he is written to believe, that the Elvis story is his story, that in heaven or in the core of the earth, he, not Elvis, is Elvis. And so here he is the constant presence, and as far as the film goes, he lives forever. He has the first word in the film, and until the end, when the picture shifts to documentary footage of Elvis's last performance, performing Unchained Melody, he has the last word. Here's Colonel Tom Parker, Baz Luhrmann's Colonel Tom Parker, in voiceover. In 1954, Sam Phillips was on a mission to change the world by recording black music. And no one, not even Phillips himself, and certainly not the real Parker, ever tried to open the story so broadly, to raise the stakes so high. Even Sam Phillips, like Gladys or Vernon or Priscilla or Scotty Moore or Bill Black or anyone else, anchored to what really happened as a character in Luhrmann's film. Those people who are, like I said, anchored to what really happened in this movie, they barely exist. Here's Parker looking out from the wings as Elvis takes the stage at the Louisiana hayride in a pink suit. Greasy hair, says Parker, dirty makeup. I can't tell you how strange he looked. No, Colonel Parker never said that. But Colonel Parker now says that. That's what art does when it takes on art. With Elvis out of Hume's High, driving his Crown electric truck, the camera moves down Beale Street. No tourist avenue as it is now, but in the early 50s, the heart of Black Memphis. And the camera homes in on an open window of a second-story bar called Club Handy. Elvis is passing by and he glimpses Big Mama Thornton, played by Shoka Durich, who would die just a month after the movie was released. He sees Big Mama Thornton slinking through Hound Dog in front of a few people in the afternoon. On the same street sometime later, Elvis sees B.B. King, played by Kevin Harrison Jr., through the front window of Lansky's, the clothing store. And with the Sun singles coming out, you see them inside, trying on new suits, and then at the window ledge at Handy's, deep in conversation, the shot staged in such a way to let you know that this is not the first conversation they're having, that they have these talks all the time. And in another setting, there is Parker again. He's envisioning Elvis selling white America back to itself, and black music, anything like Hound Dog, blocking the way. And he says, do you want to go into politics, or do you want to stay in show business? And that's an echo of the line, Sound Phillips was on a mission to change the world. And that line, do you want to go into politics, Elvis, or do you want to stay in show business? It kind of catches you up. You think, that's an idea. Okay. Elvis has a fight with Gladys in Graceland. He rushes out in a fury, and he jumps into a black and white Cadillac, and he roars off to Beale Street. Under the Handy sign, he's mobbed by black women wanting his autograph. Sorry, lost my place. Wanting his autograph, wanting to touch him, wanting to be close enough to say they were. And B.B. King has to come down and drag him inside, into a little utopia that Baz Luhrmann has made, a little utopia of American art. In the packed bar, Little Richard, played by Alton Mason, is flinging out Tutti Frutti as if he's making it rain $10 gold pieces. Mm-hmm. Mason doesn't look like Richard. He's long and tall, and where Richard would stand at the piano banging it, his Little Richard is almost Plastic Man. But he catches the spirit, and it's so hot you have to shield your eyes. And then wandering the club is Sister Rosetta Tharpe, played by the guitarist Yola, singing, working on a building quietly without her guitar, and King offers Elvis advice on how dangerous the money and fame that is about to come down on him are going to be. With Elvis and King and Richard now at a table, watching Tharpe, she moves into her signature song, the 1945 Strange Things Happening Every Day, and her guitar now raising the notes. And this will be the theme that will continue under the next sequence, a warning and a promise, with Elvis headlining a giant charity concert in Memphis, a rope dividing blacks and whites, and he's ordered by the police and by Tom Parker not to move so much as a finger. And as the film cuts between Austin Baker in the lights and played by Nicholas Bell, the Mississippi U.S. Senator James Eastland, then the most powerful racist in the United States, giving a speech, in a packed hall decorated with Confederate flags, declaring that segregation is a natural right and that cultural miscegenation is a crime. Butler holds up a single finger and he makes it wiggle like a puppet, not part of him, but again, as if it's an idea that he can see. And then, as he will do 13 years later to open his 1968 TV special, he speaks plainly, without a sound behind him, without effect, opening a song that this event takes place in 1955, hasn't even been written. If you're looking for trouble, you came to the right place. And then he breaks every rule he can find. Blacks and whites dancing together, his moving with everything he has. None of this happened. This is the soul of the movie, and maybe even the story itself. And then, stone by stone, for the next hour, real life is rebuilt, and maybe unbuilt too. So that's a little piece.
All right. So many things that brought up. And I also have questions that I have written, so I want to find a good place to start here. Actually, something you said earlier on about that. After the first edition of this book was published, did you immediately start a file for a potential second edition?
Oh no. I mean, I was 29 years old. I had just published my first book. It took 2 years to write. There were 2 unbelievably miserable years. So often I thought, you know, I could just get in my car and drive off a cliff and I wouldn't have to finish it. And I had that fantasy many, many times. When it was finished, I was just so amazed that it existed that I never gave it a thought. Then, a number of years later, a Japanese edition came out. And the person who was hired to translate the book turned out to be someone who became a very, very good friend. He died just 2 years ago. But who I worked with closely for 40 years, 45 years. He was a great scholar of American music. He had his own, he was a musician himself. He was playing Elvis songs in high school back in the 50s. He wrote the definitive book on Jimmy Davis, who wrote You Are My Sunshine, and was twice governor of Louisiana. He came from Japan to sit down with Jimmy Davis, who lived to be 100 years old, sat with him in his 90s, and Jimmy Davis told him the real stories of what his life was actually about. This was my translator, Toru Mitsui. He took it upon himself when he prepared the first Japanese edition to number 1, footnote every single person mentioned in the book who might not be familiar to Japanese audiences, and illustrate it. And not just illustrate it with pictures of musicians, people I was writing about, illustrate it with landscapes, with paintings, with old American artifacts. He knew so much more about the stuff that went into this book than I did. So it was only after that edition that struck me, this book, you know, this book could live a life. This book could change. This book could grow new limbs. It's not just there and gone. So that's when it became alive.
For For the history of rock and roll in 10 songs, the discography read in full. Most of these songs mentioned in this book can be found on YouTube. Were you ever tempted with this edition to go the reductionist route rather than the expansionist route? Take away the citations of albums or reissues or box sets for the songs, leaving out the sort of discographical information entirely? Or do you think, as I do, that that sort of information tells its own story?
I think it tells its own story, and I love books. You know, the most remarkable thing about this, when my publisher said, "Do you want to do a 50th anniversary edition?" And I had done another edition only 5 years before, at that point only a couple years before. I believe in, and there was never a question of you can only have this much space, or it can't be more than so many pages. You have infinite space. And I just felt, you know, every sentence is trying to tell a story. And if there has to be a parenthesis saying Columbia after a mention of an album that came out in Columbia, to me that information is interesting. It ought to be there. Anybody who reads this book might find themselves, if the writing is engaging enough, immediately going to YouTube or Spotify or wherever to listen to what I'm talking about, or to watch what I'm talking about. Great. You know, this book is in the world, and you play with it. But it's also a thing in itself. It has to be self-contained. It has to explain itself. Its references, its self-referentiality has to be complete.
I think the edition you're talking about prior to this one came, I believe, from the Folio Society.
That's right.
And it was an illustrated edition. It was something like 500 or 600 pages. I have not seen it, but apparently they illustrated just about everything imaginable. Is there any one, with the proviso that that all the paperwork would be settled and there would be no legalese, is there one image in that edition that you were not familiar with that you wish could be in this one?
Well, I'll tell you about that. Except for the Japanese edition, which, as I said, was my friend Toru's project that I had nothing to do with, except to, you know, admire it. I had never wanted this book illustrated. I wanted it to live and die on its writing. But the Folio Society is a small, private, special books group in England, and they said they wanted to do an illustrated edition. And I said, okay, but I don't want to be involved. I just want to see what you come up with. And I don't want there to be a picture of me. Otherwise, do whatever you want. When I was writing the book, I did think, well, maybe the way to illustrate this book would be just to have Walker Evans photographs from the 30s. Photographs of Mississippi and Alabama, of soil erosion in Tupelo. He was there in Tupelo when Elvis was born. When Elvis was 1, in Tupelo, Walker Evans was walking around taking pictures of soil erosion. I thought, maybe that. No, that didn't happen. Forgot about it. That's what the Folio Society did. They stayed away from celebrity pictures of famous people. They illustrated with Farm Security Administration photographs of America during the Great Depression. That was basically it. And having done that, and having seen what they did, looking at the proofs, I said, there's one more picture I'd like you to add, given that you realized my fantasy without even knowing it. I want you to add a certain Dorothy Lang photo. And it's a photo that, in a way, captures the ethos of the whole book and also the Elvis Presley chapter. It shows a country store pretty big store, steps up to it, railing, and sitting in a chair in the front of the store is a middle-aged white man in a straw hat and an open white shirt. He's probably 45 or 50, not a young guy. And sitting around him are half a dozen extraordinarily handsome black field hands. And they're just hanging out at the country store. That's what it's there for. It's hanging out. And they're all just kind of grinning at each other. Or maybe they're grinning at Dorothea Lange. They want to look good for the picture. And it is a picture of community and division. There's no question the white man owns the store. And there's no question that the field hands pony up 5 cents for a Coke. And he gets to keep that money. But right now it's a picture of community. You look at that picture and you can imagine music coming out of it. So I said, will you use that too? And he said, yep, and he did.
When you were conceiving this book, did anybody on the publishing end expect that you might be doing a more straightforwardly historical account of rock and roll?
No, I had a great editor. His name was Bill Whitehead. He died of AIDS in the 1980s. He was only 44. And I made it clear to him, this is going to be criticism. This is not going to be biography. This is not going to be profiles. I'm not interested in anybody's private life, and you're not going to learn a thing about marriages and divorces and drug habits or anything like that in this book. It's going to be about the music. And the people are almost going to be incidental in a certain way. One afternoon when I had no idea what this book was going to be or what it was going to turn into, not a clue. I sat down and I banged out about 7 or 8 pages, which ended up being the beginning and the end of the book. It gave me a frame. I just had to live in the middle of it for another 2 years. The only thing that really caught me up short in terms of the publisher, the editor, is when I turned the book in. There's a whole lot in the book about the South, where in some ways I'm from. The Greils are from Alabama, but I grew up in California and I'd never been to the South when I wrote this. And my editor said in the most modest, quiet way, he said, it's a really interesting book. Of course, it doesn't really have much to do with the South that I grew up in. I said, oh God, I didn't know he was from Georgia. And so, and then somebody complained, you know, it's not really a book, it's just a bunch of essays. And I said, okay, I know how to fix that. And I went through the entire manuscript and dropped in gratuitous cross-references all through the book. And it became a book.
In the early mid-60s, did you listen to Sly Stone as a Bay Area radio DJ?
Never heard him. I did listen to KSOL, that was his station, sometimes, but I don't remember Sly Stone. I listened to Big Daddy Tom Donahue and Bobby Mitchell on KYA. And then Larry Miller on KPFA, the first FM rock and roll station, starting in 1967.
Do you remember the first time you heard the song Stagger Lee? Was it the Lloyd Price version, or did you know it as a folk song?
No, it was the Lloyd Price version on the radio in 1958. It was, you know, it was number 1. And everybody heard it, and everybody thought, wow, what a strange song.
Was that the end of it back then? Did anybody talk about it in terms beyond that?
Not that I remember, no. No. People were, I had friends with Bo Diddley albums. Those were stranger. We talked about that.
You're right, they are. Did you ever hear from Jonathan Edwards or his label or PR people after your infamous counterexample of real ad copy about him with fake ad copy you wrote in its place in the book about Mick Jagger? And for that matter, did you ever hear about it from Mick Jagger?
You know, I thought you were going to ask me, did I ever hear from Jonathan Edwards, the great Puritan?
Somebody, I must point out that you, in a later edition, pointed out that was not the singer-songwriter Jonathan Edwards you referenced earlier in the book.
Right. And I thought you were going to ask me, you know, did it, and in fact I taught at Princeton 3 times, and he's buried at Princeton. I could never find his grave. I tried. No, I never heard from Jonathan Edwards. I never heard from Mick Jagger. I didn't hear from Elvis. I have talked about this book with Robbie Robertson and Randy Newman. And Harmonica Frank. We corresponded.
What is your favorite thing that each of them has said about the book?
You know, we didn't talk about the book. You know, I didn't say, did you think it was really great? What's your favorite part? But I'll read you something. Marion Keisker was the co-manager at Sun Records in the 1950s. She was Sam Phillips' lover. They ran that company together. She was the person who first noticed Elvis Presley when he came to make a record so he could hear his own voice. Make a record for yourself cost $2. And she wrote down his name and a phone number for him. She thought there was something special about him. When he came back, she said to Sam, this is the kid with the sideburns I was telling you about. Marion Keisker, I got to meet her, I got to become friendly with her. And one day she sent me a tape, a little cassette. And she said, I was talking to Sam last night. Sam was married, he went back to his wife, but they continued to talk for the rest of Sam Phillips' life. She said, I was talking to Sam last night, and you know, I told him to read your book, and he did. And so I'm sending you this tape of our phone conversation. And this is what Sam Phillips said. And you know, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little less modest. I read his book, Mystery Train. This guy is deep. I was just fully unaware of this man's mind. It's extreme. It's so subterranean. So, you know, Sam Phillips read it. And in a way, I heard from him.
This is your
Yeah.
I'm afraid to ask what Sam Phillips thought of lipstick traces. I am, let's see, in 1980, you went to England to write a feature for Rolling Stone about 3 of the great post-punk bands, Essential Logic, The Raincoats, and Gang of 4. These were bands that impressed you, you have said, with their intellectual rigor about music as much as anything. When you were out there, did any of them bring up or ask you about Mystery Train? What did they have to say about it, if anything?
No. No, none of them did. And I don't know if they were aware of the book or not, or anything else I'd written. I thought I was just a guy from the United States coming over to ask them about what they were doing and why they were doing it, which is what I did. I later met the Clash, not much later, maybe a year later, when they were recording London Calling in San Francisco, recording part of it in San Francisco. And Mick Jones said to me, "I've got a book I'd like you to sign." Oh, Mystery Train, that's so great. He's read Mystery Train, this band I love so much. And he pulled out a copy of a book that I had edited in 1969 with pieces some by me, but mostly by friends of mine in Berkeley, called Rock and Roll Will Stand, a book that, found very few readers, disappeared very, very quickly. And he was so proud he had found this book in a used bookstore in Sausalito, but he never mentioned Mystery Train.
He didn't have to. He wrote Death or Glory. Actually, I think this is probably a good time to do audience Q&A.
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions? Please raise your hand. Don't be shy.
Yeah? No? You have to do
I got one.
working.
Back there.
What did you think of the Elvis movie after the first hour and 30 minutes?
Excuse me?
What did you think of the Elvis movie after the first hour and 30 minutes?
The real world came back to stake its claim, I guess. I really love the way that Colonel Tom Parker becomes an absolute presence in the movie and becomes more and more evil. And I love the way Tom Hanks just dove into that role. He's enjoying that role. He's pushing it as far as he can. And that, as Elvis begins to fade, he comes more to the foreground, and that kept the movie alive for me.
Anyone else? Yes.
One of the joys of the book was discovering things that I would otherwise never heard, never known about. And you always conveyed a sense of surprise, delight at what you were writing about. Are there bands recently that you've heard that have surprised you, brought you a new sense of joy?
Well, there's I'll just talk about one person who I have followed, I guess it's close to 20 years now, but what she does always seems new and different and surprising. Doesn't mean I like everything, but this is someone who I will never ignore, and that's Nico Case, the singer Nico Case. I just think she's extraordinary. She can dig down so deep into feelings that people have and put them into words that you or I would not put them into, but suddenly, you recognize that. Her music is open. There's room for other people. If she's singing about things that really happened to her, they don't come off that way. They don't exclude the listener in the sense of, I'm telling you my story. That's not the way she works. So there are other people. I was, fascinated by Cat Power for years until she, sort of abandoned her career and has spent the last 5 years trying to replicate a concert Bob Dylan did in Manchester in 1965, and that's all she does. She goes around the world replicating this concert, and I guess it's making her a living, so that's okay.
Have you looked at or seen the Nico Case? I think just published a memoir. Have you seen that yet?
Yeah. What is it called?
It's a long title. I think it's like The More I Fight.
The more I fight, the more I love you. It's something like that. Yeah, I read that book. I wrote about it in my Substack column. You can look it up. You can look up online, Greil Marcus, Nico Case, Substack, and find it. It's a a remarkable book. You know, when you read memoirs by women in show business, whether it's music, whether it's movies for that matter, novelists, poets, it's just overwhelming how many of these people are raped and how a rape becomes a central event in their life, not in the same way for anybody. And they realize this is part of my story. In some horrible way, it is my story. And I have to find a way to take ownership of it. And certainly Nico Case does that. You know, she is describing a life essentially being raised by hippies who didn't notice her. I mean, oh, what's that over there? Really almost like that. And you get a sense of why her voice can be like a water spout. It just shoots up. And you wonder what it's like up there.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Greil, you wrote about why you write and what nails it. And I've always wondered about how you write, because your sentences are so poetic, they're compelling, and they have this propulsion that carries the reader along. How do you think about that as you're writing, the flow of the sentence?
Well, when it works, when I'm really writing, you know, I write a column every month, my Real Life Rock Top 10 column, which is now on Substack. And the items are relatively short. It's 1,500, 2,500 words each column, 10 items. I try to keep them short. They get longer than they ought to be, I guess. But that's more like math than writing, or it's more like putting a puzzle together. Make the pieces fit. When you're writing, when I'm writing, and it's really happening, I'm not thinking. I'm writing. My mind is not telling my fingers what to do. It just feels like it's coming out. One word leads to another. One thought turns into a word, which turns into another thought. And that, I have to be in that state to write a real book.
Yes.
After a lifetime in this sort of work and in the culture, is there something you wish you knew? Something you wish you had the answer to that you don't?
You know, I believe in questions a lot more than answers. I'm not really interested in answers. I could say, I want to know how Robert Johnson did what he did. But there's no answer to that. I have, as a writer, I have to answer that question, or I have to create an answer and see if it makes sense to me and to other people. If it in some way makes his music bigger. If what I can write about his music lets someone hear more there than they did before. So no, I don't.
Do you have a question that remains?
I'm sure there are a lot of questions. But like I said, yeah, questions, there are infinite questions. But you know, they form while I'm writing rather than I want to answer this question. I mean, when I wrote that story that Michaelangelo just mentioned about going to England in 1980 to write about the Gang of Four and Essential Logic and the Raincoats. I had never heard music like this in my life. It was just people asking questions over and over again, playing roles, acting out situations. And I wanted to know, who are these people? And I found out. There were a bunch of really smart people, and it was like being back in graduate school where everybody argued about everything.
Anybody else? Yes.
I was wondering if you had the kind of quartet of the band and Sly, Randy Newman, and Elvis in mind when you conceived this, or if you kind of shuffled any of the components around, or
Once I got a picture of what the book would be, I knew I wanted to write about Robert Johnson, Elvis, Sly Stone, and the band. And then somebody sent me a tape of records by this guy named Harmonica Frank, who I had never heard of, had someone who had no records out, whose stuff was impossible to hear. I thought, I'm gonna write about this guy in this book. First of all, I fell in love with him. I thought he was fantastic and strange and unexplainable. I'm gonna write about this guy. No one's gonna be able to criticize me. No one's gonna be able to say you're wrong, because no one will have heard of him or heard him. He will be, the ultimate mystery. And Randy Newman came along later because the book was too short, and I had to write another chapter.
Yes.
Just in terms of helping us learn more about people. I was just driving down to Winona the other day and heard a Randy Newman tune off of Land of Dreams. Can't exactly remember the title, something like Pull No Punches or something like that. His ability to comment on things, taking on these awful personas, is just such a unique thing that he can inhabit that kind of personal space. Is there anything else you would want to say about Randy Newman and
Well,
his
something,
strange ability?
I'll just mention something that he said, which is the kind of thing that I was able to find a place for in this book, in the notes to his chapter, not in the chapter itself. But I read, I listened to an interview with him, I think with Bob Edwards on NPR, quite a number of years ago. And Edwards is saying, how do you write these songs with these horrible people? And, and you're singing as these people, you're writing as these people, you're becoming them. And, yes, we can see how terrible they are. And Randy Newman said, look, these are damaged people, these are evil people, these are people who make life on earth worse for all of us. And he said, but you have to make your best case. In other words, when he sings as the slaver in Sail Away, he's not apologizing. He's not trying to say, I'm only doing this for the money. I don't really believe in it. He says you have to make your best case. You have to take that risk that the listener is going to take what you're singing, the story you're telling, literally, and not understand the conflict, the ambiguity, the horror that's inside this story, that's being told maybe so beautifully.
Yes.
You've been such a great critic of Dylan. Did you think of including Dylan in Mystery Train? And then part two, what did you think of his Farm Aid performance?
Well, I didn't watch the Farm Aid performance, so I didn't think anything of it. I can't bear Willie Nelson. I can't go near Willie Nelson. But as far as Bob Dylan and Mystery Train, the criterion that I used was I wanted to write about people who were really great, I thought, and who had never been written about well, or maybe not much at all. Obviously, Elvis Presley had been written about endlessly by countless people. I didn't think anybody had really gotten there. I thought that was still, for a writer, an undiscovered country. The same thing with the band. I thought that what had been written about Sly Stone was utter garbage by anybody I'd read. Robert Johnson, people had written good things that got me interested, but they weren't there. They weren't digging below the surface. They weren't saying, this music is so powerful, it's so different, it's so much more than what the people around him were doing. How did that happen? What went into that music? Well, that was a question I tried to answer. So I never thought about Bob Dylan. Lots of great stuff had been written about Bob Dylan. He didn't need this book. I found out later he was not real happy to be left out.
You want to leave it at that, or?
Comments at Farm Aid on YouTube, which I think you will enjoy.
Okay,
You don't want to say any more about that last part?
no,
All right, I think that should, unless we have another question, do we have another question? I think that'll be it. Oh, wait, one more, yes.
I don't know if it's a question, it's interesting how the book has traveled through time and we have traveled through time and, I guess, when you try to put yourself back to 1975, if you can do that, because so much has changed between now and then, at the time when you were chopping through the 2 years to get it done and put out into the world, you were, a newer author at Rolling Stone, you'd only been there for 3 or 4 years. So you're busy doing Rolling Stone stuff all the time and then on the side working on this? Is that?
no. I got fired from Rolling Stone in
Oh.
1970. And then I started writing for Cream. For this book, and one of the reasons that writing the book was such a miserable experience was that I shut myself in a room for 2 years and wrote this book. I didn't write anything else. I didn't write anywhere else about anything. And I cut myself off from the world. It was a really bad idea, and not the right way to write a book. The next book I said, I'm gonna, be in the world while I write this book. I'll write about all kinds of other stuff too, which may have had something to do with why it took 9 years to finish. But no, I wasn't doing anything but listening to these people and the people around them over and over and over. I remember spending weeks listening to Carl Perkins and thinking, God, I should have written about Carl Perkins. But somebody had written really well about him already, so no, that was out. I felt maybe it was arrogant. I guess it was, to say no one's written really well about Elvis. No one's gotten there. I'm going to get there. And that's, that was the motive.
All right, that should do it, I think. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.